The bottleneck in our process has changed from writing code to reviewing it and to validating it. We can produce an infinite amount of code. We can review a very small amount of code as humans in any given day.
Welcome to SaaS That App, Building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I am your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in. Hey everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of SaaS That App. I am joined today, as I am most days, by my bow-tied and bespectacled companion, Mr. Aaron. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. Finally enjoying some springtime out here.
I don't recognize that bow tie. Is that a new one or just one from deep in the collection?
It could be both. I quit trying to keep track. I don't have like a rotation of, okay, I wore this one 2 weeks ago, like church or something like that. So it could be from any time. I grabbed the one that kind of matches the shirt.
All right. Well, something for you to improve as we move into quarter two, sir.
There we go. Yep.
A bow tie schedule.
Get the rotation down.
Yeah. We got just a couple housekeeping items. We are very close to 1 year of doing SaaS That App. This is really close to our 1 year show, and we're really busy, as our other guest today will tell you. And we're moving back to going every other week on the show. So if we start missing a Tuesday, that's not an accident. It's planned. We're pulling back to doing just every other week instead of every week because the weekly cadence is pretty brutal. So just want to let everyone know that up front. Now that's out of the way, I can introduce our actual guest today. He's the wizard of all things code, the guy I spend most of my time internally working with on projects and have for like a decade or better at this point. Nolan, welcome to the show. How's it going, my friend?
Doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely.
Yes, a return guest. We don't have too many of those just yet.
Yeah. Is it time number 2 or 3 for you?
Three, I think.
Yeah. All right. You're probably our most featured guest then.
Way less nervous this time.
Yeah. It's after those idiots can do it. I'm sure that I'll be fine. So,
Right.
Cool. Well, today we're digging into Claude, not specifically and only Claude, but that's the thing that we've been using and getting a ton of value out of lately. So I brought Nolan on because he's, like I said, our head practitioner. But Daniel and Aaron and I are also right in the trenches working with Claude and wanted to give you guys an overview of the different pieces of Claude and how we're using it, what's going great, what's not going great, and how you might get some value out of it also. So, Nolan, do you want to give us just a quick definition on the separations of the different Claudes and what you're using to actually write code these days?
Sure. I am mostly using Claude Code and Codex in my terminal at this point. I find myself using browser-based tools less and less, pretty much all, in the terminal. I haven't really ventured beyond Anthropic and OpenAI models at this point. It's mostly just Opus 4.5 or 4.6 now and whatever the latest Codex model is.
Awesome. Yeah. So also using Claude Code. So functionally what that looks like is you open up, at least for me, I open up my terminal on Linux and I type Claude, and then I have a chat interface that is aware of the project and the code base that I'm working on. Are you doing the same thing? Or are you working with any different tools right now?
It's all terminal based. Yeah. Just all in the terminal.
Cool. We're talking about doing a part 2, maybe a part 3 of this. I think some other folks on our team are working with this a little bit differently. So that'll be interesting to tear into. What are some examples of types of tasks or types of things you're getting to Claude Code? So you pop into a project, you've got something to take care of, you type Claude. What's the next steps?
Yeah, I think it depends on kind of where you're at in that project. I've used it to scaffold out, a new application that we're starting from scratch. I've used it to do bug bashing and feed it Sentry errors to try to get it to help me figure out what the issue is and from an obtuse iOS stack trace. I've used it to help me plan features. I use it for UI, UX design work at this point. I pretty much use it in some capacity for everything that I'm doing throughout the day. It's very rare that I'm working on something without some kind of AI assistance at this point.
Because of that, have you found yourself coding less or just coding differently?
Absolutely coding less. The amount of output, raw, handcrafted code that I've pushed in the last 4 months is minuscule compared to what I've been doing every day for the last 10 years. It's fallen off a cliff, but I'm still very much kind of engaged in the process. It just looks very different. And the amount of code you have to write as a human is just massively decreased.
For those of us that are non-developers anymore, would you classify this as more like autocomplete on steroids? Or is this like having a partner developer that you can just feed stuff to like a ticket and it gives you back results and you're QAing it? Where would you put it on the spectrum?
I think it depends on how you want to use it. I'm using it kind of more in line with the latter. It's much more like it is a coworker that I'm delegating work to. I'm thinking about the problem with and kind of handing work off to. When I kind of started experimenting with Claude Code back in November of last year, it felt very much to me like kind of a natural progression from managing, a human coworker to just managing an AI coworker. It's very much the same thing. You can be as involved in that process as you want to be. You can hand off, massive plans to it and just kind of let it run through tokens and do its thing. Or you can kind of step through things a little bit more incrementally, hold the reins a bit tighter and work with it a little bit more closely.
So what do you find that works well in terms of like striking a balance between those controls? Is that mostly like dependent on your style or how mature the code base is, or?
Yeah, over time, I think I'm both trusting the tools more and kind of letting them do their thing and trying not to interfere with what they are good at, while at the same time stepping in for things that I know they are bad at. And it took a while to kind of develop an understanding of what that looks like. So I often kind of start with like a high level plan, let it run a bunch of cycles and kind of burn through, most of the output. And then I'll step through things incrementally, fix issues as they come up, address edge cases, things I don't like, things that I know are going to be kind of problematic long-term. It's a bit of a mix. Like I do let it work unsupervised and then I'll step in and kind of supervise all the things I want to see changed.
In terms of maintaining code quality and looking for like reuse and the kind of things that we're looking for typically as developers, is that kind of a later phase or is it something you hit on a couple of different levels? Like make sure the planning is correct beforehand and then clean up afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think code output is still pretty dependent on quality prompting and quality input. Rerolls are important because the stochastic like output and stochastic nature of these models means that like the output first time is going to be a little bit different from the output the second time. And it often doesn't nail it on the first roll. So I kind of have accepted some margin of slop and problem in the output, right? So like, that's just a part of my workflow is that I know the first iteration is never correct. I know I'm going to need to step in and kind of clean things up afterwards. And sometimes that means improving code quality, like try to dry things out by adding utility functions and helpers throughout so that it's not copying and pasting things everywhere. There is still a lot of that. But for the most part, I'm kind of arriving at the conclusion that these models are very good at writing code. And for the most part, I can kind of just let it do its thing and step in after the fact and clean it up.
So you talked a little bit about trust. Is there like a type or category of tasks that you trust it with immediately versus something that makes you hesitate? I mean, if you started being able to kind of put those into buckets of, okay, I know this one is going to be okay, I'm going to give it this one I'm going to take though, because it's never going to get it right. Is there a balance like that? Or is it just, I'm going to throw stuff at it and where it fails, I'll teach it?
I think it's more the latter. For me, there isn't a really kind of clear defining line between tasks I trust it with and tasks I don't, just because I do think that there is kind of some element of randomness in what you get. So I am using it for pretty much everything at this point at all levels of complexity. And it kind of feels to me like even for simple tasks, there is still a need for somebody to kind of go in and clean things up after the fact. And it's the same for very complex tasks.
Yeah, I find that its intuitions for user interface are really bad, or at least very out of line for my vision. And I have a hard time putting my vision into the prompt. So usually what I will end up with is end up with the working implementation. And then I will go through and tear it apart on how it implemented the user interface. It'd be like, no, you need to do this, and this. And it does a pretty good job of cleaning that stuff up after the fact. But if I'd say one thing that I'm saying that I don't think it does a good job with, I think if I hand a user interface task off to a junior dev, it comes back closer to what I want than what Claude comes back with on average, which may be an okay segue into the next thing is one thing I'm not using is any skills related to that. So can you talk a little bit about skills and how those work and if you're saying them work correctly?
I'm using like 2 to 3 skills throughout the day at this point, but the front end design skill, which was published by Anthropic, is one of those few. And the difference in output in InDesign, kind of just general UI UX between using the skill and not using it is massive. I mean, with the skill, I can often get just general themes that are far and away better than something I could do on the fly. Something maybe not quite as good as what our designer can do, but it's leaning more in that direction than like the slop that I would produce just kind of out of pocket. So as interesting as it is, like these skills are just simple markdown files, but for whatever reason, like just telling the LLM not to implement the same design that it will implement by default without the skill seems to just produce something much more interesting and visually appealing.
Yeah, I don't think that you're alone in that assessment either. Somebody that we're probably going to have one for a part 2 of this, Steve, he's already over the moon with what it's doing on the output side, on the user interface side, because he likes to work in that direction rather than back to front. He likes to get the UI looking the way that he wants it and then implement the code based on that. And he is very excited about several of the things that it's generating. So I know he's kind of seeing that too, and he's utilizing those skills as well.
Yeah, Steve is doing a bunch of different stuff and engaging with it a little bit differently than we are. So that's one of the reasons I want to bring him on. I think Daniel is also one who's doing some different kinds of tests, which are maybe less relevant to programming, but he's really unleashed Claude on a couple of things, and I want to bring him on as well. So we've probably got a couple of episodes here about how our team is working with AI and where we're seeing value, which I think is awesome. Real quick, this episode is brought to you by Delta Systems, which is what Aaron and I do when we're not talking through microphones to you, the people of the internet. We've got a really, really great software team here, and we love to work with cool people on cool projects. So if that sounds like you and you've got a problem or you're in some kind of a jam, go to deltasystems.com, grab the time with us. We can beat up on your problem together, and if there's a fit there, amazing, we'll help you out. So deltasystems.com, grab an appointment, and hey, maybe we can work together. So I guess practically my workflow is I write a CloudMD file is like one of the first things I do before I start writing a project or working with Claude. And I put a lot of stuff in there about like, I don't want to have Claude manage Git for me. Like maybe I'll get there eventually, but right now I'm very specific about how commit messages are. I have like my style for doing that. And I've had to do a bunch of stuff that has annoyed me, or it's tried to give itself little attributions in my commit messages or just commit too much. And I don't like that stuff. So I run my own Git, which is I put in there. I have a bias towards writing things that are drier earlier. I have a bias towards planning and not just making assumptions. So, I mean, those are some things that I put in my file. Are you putting some more things, Nolan? Do you have other things that you're like really important to you to go in the CloudMD so that you can work with these things successfully?
I'm using instructions less and less as I use these tools more, which has kind of been an interesting evolution. At this point, my CloudMDs maybe kind of start with like, a 2 or 3 sentence summary of what the application is, and then some instructions for verifying work, like running tests, running a lid step, something like that. And then a section for things I don't want it to do moving forward. Like maybe it tries to verify its work by running the server, even though I already have a server running locally and I'm going to verify the work. So just course corrections that I want to make permanent or try to make permanent. That's about it. And I very much started with this idea that like your agent MD file needed to be massive and it needed to outline every little detail possible. And I think I'm starting to realize that that kind of adds more friction to the process. And there is some element of just like letting the model do what it's good at, like inferring what the tech stack is or what the product may be based on the controller names. Like it's very good at doing those things. And I often wound up with these issues where I had this massive agent MD file that kind of got stale or out of sync over time. And those instructions were actually conflicting with features or functionality that had been pushed into the code base over time, which was causing problems. So I'm kind of just letting it do its thing now and adding really minimal instructions where needed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think all the instructions that I add are like specific to like code quality things or how to verify tests, or like one thing that my Claude keeps doing is trying to like install a bunch of Python libraries so it can run some scripts to verify something. Just like, okay, look, if you're going to do something like that, just Ruby's already installed. Stop trying to install Python libraries. So I did have Claude dump a development database that was full of actual data that was very useful to have for testing. And afterwards it was like, sorry, my bad, but it did kill my database. I know Daniel had an issue where it tried to run a sudo command on a remote server that was hosting a production system. So the monitoring still is really required. I guess I have a take on this, but let me ask you first, Nolan, how is like your workload in terms of like how hard your job is changed or is maintained, or are you just getting more done? But like, has Claude made your life any easier or actually harder or the same, just but different?
My workload has either stayed steady or increased since I've started using these tools. And I mean, a function, part of that is just where we're at as a company and how many projects we have running concurrently. It is absolutely a force multiplier, and it allows you to output, 10x the code that you used to. But at least in our business, the work seems to scale with your resources. So we just have more things going on at once. And, the AI is helping with that. But the way I'm spending my time throughout the day is now just different. It's jumping across terminal windows, managing multiple projects at once, trying to keep everything like, as soon as this agent is done with this task, I'm reviewing it and tweaking it and then moving on to the next one. So it just looks different. I think if you're one person working on one project, like I bet you it's a massive speed up, a massive efficiency boost. And it is for me too, but my workload is about the same probably.
Yeah, I find that it's been a huge bias towards executive function and like all the things that have made me a non-mediocre, hopefully, manager in my life. I'm now managing these agents, but all of the struggle I used to have of just finding time to focus and actually sit down and write features, I can now get a lot of progress made on those kinds of features in my manager schedule, to go back to Paul Graham's idea of the maker schedule versus the manager schedule. And now people who are talented and have a lot of technical ability but operate on a manager schedule, as people who move up the corporate ladder tend to become more and more managers, I think we're actually able to use some of our talent to get things done, which is exciting. But it certainly has not made my life any easier. Quite the opposite, actually. It's like now I have like another, like instead of just Slack and email, I have yet another thing where it's these 3 agents who are just pestering me all day about, and they never ask easy questions. Like at least junior developers, you'll get a stupid question once in a while and you're like, wow, man, obviously this. But for the most part, Claude comes back and it has like these really like, I identified these huge foundational things you didn't consider when you prompted me. And now I'm like, oh man, I have to think about this, but I'm on a meeting. So I don't know if that resonates with you, Nolan. That's kind of been my experience with it.
It does. I mean, I think that there's a difference in working with these agentic tools versus like a super junior or maybe even a lower mid-level developer, in that a lot of the time the output is pretty good. It's pretty close to actually like what I'm asking for. And the gap in cleaning up that work is often pretty small, whereas that's often not the case with a junior or somebody who's kind of a little bit less experienced. So it's not like managing a junior. It's a lot easier than that and much more productive with that, in my opinion. But it requires my oversight. It's not you can't just set it and forget it.
So on projects where you're using Claude to do most of your development lift, are you then just running the server and going in and like doing testing? So you're kind of now like a technical QA with agentic powers? Is that kind of your role these days?
I mean, I still offload as much QA to our QA person as possible for client work. I have found that there are a couple of tools that allow Claude to kind of test its own work in the browser. We're always adding, unit tests and integration tests. But for the most part, I still very much have to be in the loop for quality assurance and testing. There's a tool called the Agent Browser, which I think it's published by Vercel and maintained by Vercel. And I found that you can allow Claude to have access to an agent browser and kind of just tell it to, do an end-to-end test in the browser of this thing that you just did. And it does okay. It's not perfect, but, it might find kind of the low-hanging fruit of the bugs that it just wrote and help you out a little bit, but still very much requires a human for testing.
Claude will tag out big features and it'll write tons and tons of code. And then it's just like every step of the process that it wrote is busted in some way and you have to go through and fix it. I mean, to be fair, as we write code, we do the same thing. But it seems like Claude will get to an endpoint where it's like, I'm done with the project. And you're like, well, if there's a null pointer exception in the first page that I tried to load, it seems like you should have been able to figure out that this page is going to have a syntax error or whatever. But not to say that's not useful.
I have found that using a variety of models for each change has eliminated some of those kind of obvious issues. So my workflow at this point often looks like I'll plan something out in Claude, let Claude take the first pass in implementing that feature or bug fix or whatever, and then have Codex do a local code review of all of the changes that Claude just made and kind of break those down and point out flaws or help me harden the implementation or whatever. And there's kind of an element of just like throw more tokens at it and let a variety of models beat up on it. And I have found that the output tends to be a little bit better. I don't know what to attribute that to. I think Codex just feels like it kind of steps through code a little bit differently than Claude does. And maybe it has kind of a broader understanding of the entire application. But I have noticed a massive decrease in just kind of obvious bugs by using a combination of models.
So how does that interplay? Like, how do you coordinate that interplay between agents when you're doing that?
I have Claude code running in one terminal and Codex running in another, and they're just in the same directory and they're just looking at the same code and kind of picking each other's changes apart.
So if like Codex identifies something that Claude did that you want to fix, do you have Codex run the fix for it, or do you have it inform Claude what it wants done?
Depends. Sometimes I'll ask Claude if Codex's finding is valid and explain to me why it is either valid or not valid. So I'll have them do a bit of a debate between each other and see what happens. But I've found that Codex is often good at fixing bugs Claude wrote, and vice versa is not often true. So I'm kind of treating Codex as like the manager and the code reviewer before I get to it, essentially. So it kind of eliminates some of the manual review work that I need to do.
So just to kind of shift around a little bit, because we're kind of leaning into, is AI actually replacing people at this point? I know that you are working on several projects with other developers utilizing Claude. So I'm kind of curious how Claude Code Codex has changed how you collaborate with those human developers.
Yeah. At this point, the bottleneck in our process has changed from writing code to reviewing it and to validating it. We can produce an infinite amount of code. We can review a very small amount of code as humans in any given day. So managing the amount of features and code that is pushed in through PRs on a day-to-day basis is still a problem that like we're trying to think through. It's so easy to kind of let the agent take the reins and lean on it a little bit too heavily to understand what this application or product is supposed to do. And as humans, we naturally kind of want to use the tool and offload that intellectual responsibility from ourselves, which I think is a serious problem that we need to address. I've had issues where neither the developer who was implementing the feature or I understood enough about what the application was supposed to do that I felt very uneasy, like merging the PR into the code base, because I didn't know. Like I could spot an obvious like syntax error, but from a higher level, I have no idea if this is correct. Like I don't really understand the underlying application. I don't know the business needs. I don't know if this is correct. And like there is kind of an element where the more removed we are from the code base, I think the closer we need to be to understanding the product like holistically and the business need holistically to feel confident that what the tool is producing is going to work long term. I think that's one of the major issues that I'm still trying to figure out and thinking through.
So when you do decide at some point that you're going to pull in another developer to help you with the project or to just take the project up from you or something like that, do you share the resources that you've already gleaned from what you've done in Claude? Like, do you just wholly give them like what the MD file is so that they're starting from the same point you did? Do you let them have flexibility in teaching their instance, how they write code, how they go about processing things? I'm just trying to get an idea of how do you make sure that what you're producing via Claude is in alignment with what someone else is about to merge in using Claude for themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we as a shop are still kind of trying to figure that out. And I think over time, we will have more defined guardrails and processes in place for using these tools collaboratively. I think anything that is relevant to the project or the agent should be committed to the code base. So it's there in source code and available to the agent. But I think for a lot of kind of personal preferences about how these tools work, I think it's probably fine to kind of just let every developer use it in the way that they see fit, as long as it's producing good output and we feel confident about it. Yeah, I think we're still kind of in an early phase where we're trying to figure out exactly what managing these tools as a company or an organization looks like.
I noticed that really talented folks tend to get a ton of value out of these tools. And I think folks who are earlier in their journey on technology and development are getting like incrementally less value. So I think about it as like there's like a fixed multiple, say it's like a 5x speed up or something. So if you were a 10 as a developer, you're now a 50 developer, but someone who's a 3 is only a 15. So it's like the speed up is like a fixed amount, but you're multiplying ways heavily. I don't know if that will always be the case, but I think having the technical architectural know-how, having the business case to your point from earlier, like having a strong understanding of what the client wants, what the business case is, with how the software is supposed to work, and then having like a general experience of working with Claude and seeing the stupid things that it does that you had to stop it from doing. Stop trying to install and run Python scripts locally when you have Ruby and Bash and all these other tools, or it does a lot of things that are silly. And I think as we work with it more and more, we just get really good at identifying like, Claude, you're kind of going in circles here. Please take a step back. And you can literally just tell it to do that. Like, hey, you're spinning your wheels. Like, look at this problem holistically. Let's go back to first principles and let's try to fix together, because this thing that you're doing, you're vacillating and it's not working. So I think getting a general skill set of like getting better at working with AI is actually a huge component of the lift that we're seeing. And it's something that we're all learning right now because this stuff became viable months ago. And 6 months from now, if someone's coming into this and listening to this episode in October or November or 2027, for God help us, like, who knows what the state of things will be, right?
It'll be posterity at this point.
Yeah.
I do really worry about handing off tasks to a developer to solve with AI when they're not familiar with the language or the framework or whatever. Like, I do think that having kind of a base level knowledge of whatever technology you're working with produces a much better output from these coding tools. And if somebody were learning the framework, I would be very hesitant to let them loose on a problem, using AI, only AI, because I don't think they're going to know what to look for.
That's a huge concern of mine too. And something that I think we even put Justin in our prognostication episode way up front is that the junior devs that are coming up today, they're going to be better at using AI than we are because they started at the very outset with it. But the problem that I see is that they're not going to have your skill set to be able to manage it and QA it and test it the way that you do. And I'm not sure how they get there, or if there's going to be interest to get there. If they're going to use just an LLM to be their teacher to learn, and then they're immediately going to jump over into some coding models and then just start building and then just kind of go back and forth and back and forth. If that becomes the way that you teach yourself these days, I'm concerned that it's going to miss out on, like you say, the fundamentals of the platform or the programming language or the libraries that you're even supposed to be working with enough to know, hey, why are you using 14 libraries? One will do, kind of a thing. So it's a concern of mine.
That's one of the reasons, at least for like project structure, I like having some extra details in that CloudMD, not about like what the project is, but like Claude, for whatever reason, loves to write JavaScript. And we just don't write a ton of JavaScript in Rails usually. I mean, we do some for sure, but Claude will have these very JavaScript forward approaches to solving issues that are better solved by using some Rails core features, not to get super deep in the weeds. But so I just dropped that on my CloudMD, which is just like, yeah, JavaScript should be as light as possible. It should always be in a stimulus controller. And basically all the stuff should be handled in the back end with the exception of like interactivity that we have to have. And when we do that interactivity, it's got to be in a stimulus controller the Rails way, the way that we write code now. And if you put that in your CloudMD, it tends to do these very JavaScript forward approaches a lot less. I mean, I don't know if you find yourself smacking down Claude doing the same thing, Nolan, but I do constantly see it writing these like very JS forward approaches to things that are better solved by Ruby features.
Totally, yeah. And when I'm working with an agentic coding tool on a React project or some other JavaScript framework project, it has a tendency to kind of turn to a plugin for everything, just because like the majority of human code at this point that I was trained on has a ton of kind of extraneous dependencies. So I'm constantly having to tell it like, no, don't pull in this package. Just write the 100 lines of code to recreate it or build it better or whatever.
Yeah, definitely a junior dev tendency, which is like, oh, I'm not actually going to write code. I'm just going to find a library that does that and plug it in. And then you end up with these 500 poorly maintained libraries in your code base. You got other problems. So.
Which, from a growth curve of a human, you would expect that too. So
absolutely. Do you have any tips or any like hot level learnings you can share with folks who are kind of getting into working with these kinds of tools on writing code? Some hard earned learnings that you have?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm still very much figuring it out for myself. I'm not an expert in any of these things, and I'm trying to get up to speed like everybody else. I think a huge part of this is just like experimentation and keeping an open mind. I was in this position where for the last couple of years, it felt like ChatGPT was helpful, but that was maybe like where AI coding assistants had plateaued and they kind of didn't pay too much attention to it. And when I wound up installing Claude last November, I mean, my mind was blown and it was like, oh, the next version of what this looks like is here. It's now feasible and I can actually use this throughout the day. So like my workflow has changed overnight and I think that will continue to happen. And for every developer, I think like, we don't know what it's going to look like in the future, but all we can do is try to keep up pace, stay curious, try things as they're released and try not to anchor too hard to biases that we establish for whatever is currently out.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to be at the bleeding edge, but for our firm in particular, we need to avoid the hemorrhaging edge, right? So we're staying several months behind the cutting, the very, very bleeding hemorrhaging of things. But I think as an individual contributor, as someone who's doing their own tinkering and projects, we need to be much more adventurous. So like it's one of the reasons I love having people on staff who have their own projects, right? Everyone we've talked about having on this call to talk about this has their own side projects and their own things that they write that are separate from like their day jobs. And so like I have a personal assistant that I wrote and I don't even know if I've opened up an IDE on that project. Like at some point I got it running so I could test things, but like my email triage and all sorts of personal tasks are happening and I haven't actually seen a line of code on that project. I don't think maybe, but it's probably related to like a deployment configuration. And I obviously can't do that with a customer's code, right? But for my own project, I can do that. And it's like, I'm very curious to review that as it becomes necessary and actually see like, hey, I just kind of let Claude do this. And I gave it a lot of instructions about what I wanted, but I haven't actually touched the code or even reviewed it. Do you have any projects that you've just straight up not even opened or reviewed code on, Nolan, where you just like asked Claude to write a project?
I have side projects where I've written maybe 5% of the code, but I'm still in the loop. I'm still a part of it. But I mean, it's enabled me to start and see side projects through to completion that were just hanging out in the back of my mind for years because I just didn't have the energy or the motivation to work on it after a long day of work. So these things are insanely powerful for a hobbyist or for somebody who just wants to tinker. And I highly encourage everybody to play around with them.
Okay, so I got to know, what is the laziest thing you've gotten away with then? You don't have to name a client or a project. In fact, I would rather you didn't. But what is like, you know what? I just got to get this done. I don't even care. Do this thing and just push to production.
I've definitely had Claude implement sweeping changes on a personal project and just like deployed it to production without looking, just clicking create pull request and creating, clicking merge right away and just kind of hoping it works. Yeah, it's easy to fall into that, but we definitely don't do that for client work.
Good answer. I like that.
We have a bit more rigor in review, but
yeah.
It also comes back to like the fundamental idea of like criticality. And one of the things that we take over a client project often we do is we have someone who is very rigorous and had a lot of opinions about the right way to do things, but sometimes their rigor and their opinions and their technology choices were not really aligned with the size of firm they were working for. And we end up pulling back a lot of the rigor, which it sounds bad, but you installed a ton of process on something that wasn't really solidified yet. And now you're dragging this process along as you're trying to pivot and make progress. I think that there's a sweet spot for Claude in that dynamic where like you need to have the right amount of oversight to make sure we're writing good code. And we also need to take in the number of users and the magnitude of problem that we could generate with issues in production and have that stuff inform kind of the amount of rigor we put onto our code bases. So awesome. I'm kind of Clauded out. Aaron, do you have more? Do you want to talk to Nolan about more things to do with Claude and Codex and all the other AI things?
I've actually asked a couple of other people this too that have been using it even more in depth than I have in other ways. But if something were to happen and like Claude were to get the nuke tomorrow, no more Claude code, what would hurt you the most? Like what would bother you the most? What will you miss if this just like all of a sudden train wrecks and it's no longer?
I would miss the feeling of momentum that these tools can give you because you can push so much code across so many projects at once. And I think that's about it. I have always really enjoyed writing code. That's like my favorite part of this job. So I think if all this went away tomorrow, I'd probably be fine. I would miss the ability to kind of work on my own projects in the background. That has been really empowering and super awesome. But I think I would be okay if it went away. I don't think it will.
Oh, I don't either. I'm just curious.
I think the open source models that are out there are increasingly competitive with a few months ago's models. And unfortunately, the first model that I thought was great for prime time was a few months old. But in a year, we're going to have an open source model that does what we can do today. And we'll be able to solve some of the other concerns, especially with shipping code off to third party. That's a big concern for some customers and some clients. And at this point, there are answers for not doing that. But if you run an open source model locally, that's a great one. Amazon Bedrock is potentially another one. So there are some other answers out there. But I'm very excited about the fact that this is becoming completely commonplace, and we're going to have free versions of stuff that's as good as Opus like before that long. It's unavoidable. Awesome. Let's call it a day then. It's been a hell of an episode. Nolan, thank you for coming on. Thanks for telling us about Claude. I selfishly invited you on because I wanted to know what I was doing wrong. So I got some homework to do. Thanks for the info.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Aaron, it's always a pleasure. We will see you guys kind of every other week, I think, going forward. But thanks for listening along. Cheers.
Thanks all. Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.